Welcome to my channel, Welcome to that channel.
Hamish Macbeth had always believed that a policeman's first duty was to avoid unnecessary work. This principle was not written in any police manual, mostly because police manuals were written by people who had never been required to spend a wet Tuesday afternoon in Lockdow. On this particular Tuesday, Hamish was sitting behind the stove at the Lockdow Hotel with a mug of coffee between his hands, his boots propped against the warm iron, and his police cap pulled low over his eyes. Outside, rain swept across the village in silver curtains. It rattled against the windows. It hissed down the gutters. It turned the narrow road into a shining ribbon of mud and made the mountains beyond Lockdow disappear entirely. Hamish considered this excellent weather. It discouraged visitors. It discouraged tourists. Most importantly, it discouraged Superintendent Blair from driving north from Strathbane. Hamish took another sip of coffee. "You're looking smug," said Mrs. Kinty. Hamish opened one eye. Mrs. Kinty stood behind the hotel counter, with her arms folded over her ample bosom. She had been watching him for several minutes, which meant she had either noticed something or was preparing to invent something. "Just tired," said Hamish. "You've been sitting there for an hour. Long journey. You walked in from the police station." "Exactly." Mrs. Kinty sniffed. She had never been convinced that Hamish was as stupid as he pretended to be. This was one of the reasons he liked her. "There's someone new in the village," she said. Hamish's eyes closed again. "That's terrible. English. Even worse. Name's Alistair Penrith." Hamish sighed. "Is he rich?" "Very. Then he'll leave soon." Mrs. Kinty frowned. "He's bought the old Bell House." That opened Hamish's other eye. The old Bell House stood on the hill above the village, beside the ruins of St. Colm's Church. The church itself had been abandoned for decades. Its roof had fallen in. Its graveyard was choked with weeds, and the old bell tower leaned slightly toward the sea as if it had grown tired of standing upright. Nobody in Lockdow went there after dark, not because of ghosts. The villagers were practical people. They went there during daylight and avoided it perfectly well then. Hamish took another drink. What's he doing with it? Renovating. Why? Because he's English. Mrs. Kinty said it with such finality that Hamish could think of no sensible objection. What sort of English? What do you mean? London English? Manchester English? English who believes Scotland is a theme park. London. Hamish groaned. Mrs. Kinty smiled. He has a large motor car. Of course, and a woman with him. Wife? Nobody knows. Good. Why is that good? Means the village has something to talk about. Mrs. Kinty leaned closer. They say he's here to turn the Bell House into a luxury retreat. Hamish sat upright. Luxury. Aye. For tourists? Apparently. Hamish looked toward the rain-streaked window. He loved Lockdow. He loved its quiet roads, stubborn fishermen, rough hills and winds that could strip the paint from a door. He even loved its gossip, but there were certain things that Highland villages had learned to live without. Luxury retreats were one of them. "What does he think we're lacking?" Hamish asked. "Hot towels." Hamish stared at her. Hot towels. And something called a wellness garden. Hamish's expression became solemn. "That sounds dangerous." Mrs. Kinty laughed. The door opened. A gust of cold air blew into the hotel, followed by a tall man in a dark green waxed coat. He was perhaps 50, silver-haired, clean-shaven, and possessed the sort of polished appearance that made Hamish suspicious immediately. The stranger removed his gloves. "Good afternoon." Nobody answered. The man looked around. "I'm Alistair Penrith." Mrs. Kinty smiled with the politeness of someone greeting a tax collector. "Welcome to Lockdow." Penrith glanced at Hamish. "And you?" Hamish looked down at himself. His sweater had a hole in one sleeve. There was mud on one boot. His hair was untidy. His police trousers had not been ironed in several days. "I'm Hamish." "Just Hamish?" "Aye." Penrith waited. Hamish waited longer. Finally, Penrith gave up. "Do you live here?" "Aye." "What do you do?" Hamish considered lying. But there was no point. "Police." Penrith's eyebrows rose. "You?" "Aye." "You're the local constable?" Hamish nodded. Penrith looked him up and down again. There was something faintly amused in his expression. "I see." Hamish smiled. It was a mild, harmless smile. The sort of smile that encouraged people to underestimate him. "Coffee?" asked Mrs. Kinty. Penrith nodded. "Black." Hamish looked at Mrs. Kinty. "That's the sort who drinks coffee black." "I heard you." Penrith sat at a table near the window. Within 5 minutes he had complained about the rain. Within 7 minutes he had complained about the heating. Within 10 minutes he had asked whether Lockdow possessed a decent restaurant. Mrs. Kinty directed him toward the hotel kitchen. Penrith looked horrified. I mean a proper restaurant. There's a pub in Strathbane. That's 40 minutes away. Aye. Is that the nearest decent place? Aye. He sighed. Hamish hid a smile behind his mug. Penrith was going to fit into Lockdow beautifully, or die trying. Niced, na me elf. By 4 o'clock the rain had become heavier. Hamish returned to the police station, where his dog was asleep beneath the desk. Luggs opened one eye as Hamish entered. Don't look at me like that, said Hamish. Luggs closed his eye. You've been asleep all afternoon. The dog remained motionless. Hamish hung his coat beside the door.
The telephone rang.
He ignored it. It rang again. He ignored it again. On the third ring, Luggs lifted his head. Traitor, Hamish muttered. He picked up the receiver. Lockdow Police. A breathless voice answered. Constable Macbeth. Aye. It's Angus McCrae. Hamish frowned. Angus was the caretaker of St. Colm's graveyard, and, despite being 73, considered himself an expert on all matters involving ladders, fishing, sheep and women. What is it? You'd better come up to the old church. Why? There was silence. Then Angus said quietly, There's a body. Hamish looked at Luggs. The dog was already standing. Hamish sighed. Of course there is. The old church stood above the village beneath a sky the colour of dirty wool. By the time Hamish reached it, the rain had soaked through his coat. Angus McCrae waited beside the stone wall. His face was pale. You've been drinking, Hamish said. Only one. Then you're not imagining it. I wish I was. Hamish climbed over the wall. Luggs followed. The graveyard smelled of wet earth and seaweed. The old bell tower rose ahead of them. At its base stood a pile of fallen stones and rusted iron. Angus pointed. There. Hamish looked. For several seconds he said nothing. A man lay beneath the old church bell. The bell itself had fallen from its wooden frame years ago and rested on the ground beneath the tower, half buried in weeds. The dead man was sprawled beside it. His expensive coat was covered in mud. One polished shoe was missing. His head rested against the great bronze curve of the bell. Hamish crouched. He knew the face. Alistair Penrith, the luxury retreat man, the man who had complained about the rain, the man who had wanted hot towels. Hamish sighed. That's inconvenient. Angus stared at him. Inconvenient. Aye. There's a dead man lying under a church bell. I can see that. Then why are you saying inconvenient? Huh. Hamish stood. Because it means Blair will come. Angus blinked. That's what you're worried about. Aye. A distant sound came through the rain. An engine. Hamish looked toward the road. A black police car was climbing the hill. Too late, he said. The car stopped. The door opened. Detective Chief Inspector Blair emerged beneath a large umbrella. 2 officers followed him. Blair took 3 steps into the graveyard and looked at the body. Then he looked at Hamish. His face brightened. Macbeth. Hamish knew that expression. It meant trouble. Sir, what have you done now? Nothing. Blair glanced at the corpse. Dead Englishman. Aye, of course. Blair walked toward the body. Who found him? Angus McCrae. Any witnesses? No. Any suspects? Not yet. Blair looked irritated. Well, don't just stand there. Hamish looked at the corpse again. I was thinking, try doing some police work instead. Hamish nodded obediently. He bent down beside Penrith. The dead man's face was turned toward the bell. His right hand was clenched. Hamish studied it. There was something dark between the fingers. A scrap of cloth. Green. Hamish glanced at Penrith's coat. It was dark green, but the cloth in his hand was a different shade. Almost black. Hamish looked toward the bell, then at the missing shoe, then at the mud beneath the man's shoulder. He noticed something else. There were footprints leading toward the church. One set belonged to Angus, another set belonged to Hamish. But beside the bell, partially hidden beneath the wet grass, were 2 smaller prints. Not boots, not men's shoes. Something with a narrow heel. Hamish straightened. Blair was shouting at one of the officers. Hamish said nothing. He simply looked toward the ruined church. For the first time that afternoon, he forgot about coffee. The dead man had not simply fallen beneath the bell. Someone had put him there. And whoever had done it had been wearing shoes far too fashionable for Lockdow. Hamish glanced at Luggs. The dog stared back. Aye, Hamish murmured. This is going to be a nuisance. Then the old church bell moved. Just slightly. A low metallic sound rolled through the graveyard. Everyone froze. Hamish looked up. The bell had not moved by itself. Someone, or something, had disturbed it from the other side. Hamish's hand went quietly toward his coat pocket. Blair shouted, "Who's there?" No answer. Only the rain. Hamish smiled faintly. Now that was interesting. The murderer might have left the body, but he had not necessarily left the graveyard. And Hamish Macbeth, who had been hoping for a quiet afternoon, suddenly found himself wishing very much for a cup of coffee. Section 2. The woman behind the bell. Hamish moved before Blair could shout again. He slipped behind the bell tower, keeping low beneath the dripping branches of an elder bush. Lugs followed without being asked. Nothing moved on that wet afternoon. Rain whispered over the graves. Hamish waited. He stepped around the tower. A figure stood beside the ruined doorway. It was a woman. She wore a dark waterproof coat, a scarf pulled high around her face, and shoes that were entirely unsuitable for climbing through a Highland graveyard. For one brief second she stared at Hamish. Then she ran. Hamish sighed. He had never enjoyed running after people. Running was an activity best undertaken by dogs, athletes, and criminals who had not thought matters through. Lugs shot after her. "Good lad," Hamish called. The woman reached the low stone wall. Lugs caught up. She stumbled. Hamish arrived moments later and found her sitting in the wet grass, looking furious. She lowered her scarf. Hamish recognized her. She was the woman who had accompanied Penrith into the hotel. "Mrs. Penrith?" he asked. "No." "Miss Penrith?" "No." "Then you're making this difficult." "My name is Celia Vane." She looked at him suspiciously. "You're not going to arrest me?" "Should I?" "I don't know." "Neither do I." She stared at him. Hamish offered a hand. She ignored it and stood by herself. "You were hiding behind the church," he said. "I was frightened." "Of what?" She looked toward the bell tower. "Of him." "Mr. Penrith?" She nodded. "He was dead." "I know. Before I told you?" Her face changed, only slightly. Hamish noticed. "I heard people talking," she said. "Blair hasn't told anyone yet." Celia looked away. Hamish said nothing. This was one of his favorite methods of interrogation. Most people could not bear silence. They filled it. Celia filled it quickly. "Alistair was difficult," she said. "Most dead people are." "He had enemies." "How many?" She hesitated. "Several." "That's vague." "He was going to ruin people." "By opening a hotel?" "It wasn't going to be a hotel." Hamish looked at her. "What was it?" She shook her head. "I shouldn't have come here." "That may be true." "You don't understand." "No." She almost smiled. Hamish thought that was promising. Blair's voice carried across the graveyard. "Macbeth." Hamish turned. Blair was standing beside Penrith's body. "Where are you?" "Here." "Who is that woman?" Celia immediately stepped backward. Hamish saw the fear return to her eyes. "Stay here," he said. She shook her head. "No." Then she ran again. This time Hamish did not follow. He watched her disappear through the trees. Blair came toward him, red-faced. Who was she? Celia Vane. What was she doing here? Looking for something. What? Hamish glanced at the church. "I don't know." Blair stared at him. "You're becoming increasingly useless." Hamish smiled. "Thank you, sir." Blair did not hear the sarcasm. He rarely did. The investigation soon became noisy. 2 more officers arrived from Strathbane. They photographed the body, marked footprints, and searched the ruined church. Blair questioned Angus twice, then questioned him again because he had forgotten what he had asked the first time. Angus became increasingly offended. "I've already told you," he said. Blair glared. "You found the body." "Aye." "Why were you here?" "I told you." "Checking the graves." "In the rain?" "Graves don't check themselves." Hamish coughed to hide a laugh. Blair turned on him. "Anything to add?" "No." "Good." Hamish wandered away. He went back to the body. The scrap of dark cloth was still in Penrith's hand. He looked closer. It was not cloth from clothing. It was wool. A thick, rough wool. Hamish remembered seeing a similar material earlier, at the hotel. He looked toward the road. A thought arrived quietly. He did not trust thoughts that arrived noisily. He crouched beside the bell. The bronze surface was streaked with rain. Near the bottom was a fresh smear. Not blood, grease. Hamish touched it with one finger. Then he smelled it. Oil. Old machinery oil. He looked up at the bell's rusted support. Someone had recently worked on it. Why? The bell had not rung in years, unless someone had wanted it to ring. Hamish stood. Behind him, Blair was telling a constable that Penrith had probably been killed during a robbery. Hamish looked at the dead man's expensive watch. Still there. His wallet was still there. His rings were still there. Robbery seemed unlikely, but Blair liked easy answers. Easy answers meant quick arrests. Quick arrests meant paperwork. And paperwork meant Blair could return to Strathbane believing himself brilliant. Hamish decided to let him. He walked back toward the village. At the hotel, Mrs. Kinty was waiting. "You've heard?" Hamish asked. "Everyone has heard." "Who told you?" "Angus. He only left 5 minutes ago. He talks quickly when frightened." Mrs. Kinty poured coffee. Hamish sat. "What do you know about Celia Vane?" Mrs. Kinty stopped pouring. "That woman? Aye. She came with Penrith. What else? She stayed here last night. Alone? No." Mrs. Kinty leaned closer. "There was another man." Hamish felt his interest sharpen. "What man?" "I don't know. You must have seen him. I saw his coat." "What color?" "Green." Hamish's coffee suddenly tasted much better. "Dark green?" Mrs. Kinty nodded. "Very dark." Hamish looked toward the rain. 2 green coats, 1 dead man, 1 mysterious companion, and a scrap of wool clenched in the dead man's hand. He took another sip. "Anything else?" Mrs. Kinty thought. "Yes." "What?" "The man had a limp." Hamish stopped drinking. Outside, a car engine started somewhere up the road. He looked toward the window. A dark vehicle moved through the rain. For an instant, Hamish saw the driver. A man. Dark coat, and one shoulder held slightly higher than the other. Hamish stood. Mrs. Kinty frowned. "Where are you going?" Hamish reached for his coat. "To do some police work." She stared at him. "Are you ill?" "Probably." And for once, Hamish Macbeth was not entirely joking. Section 3. The man with the limp. Hamish did not chase the car. Instead, he watched it disappear down the road. Then he sat back down. Mrs. Kinty stared at him. "You said you were going to do police work." "I am." "You're sitting. It is an important part of police work." She shook her head and began wiping the counter. Hamish drank his coffee. The village had already begun discussing the murder. Hamish finished his coffee and walked toward the police station. Lugs trotted beside him. "You saw him too," Hamish said. The dog wagged his tail. "That isn't useful." Lugs continued wagging. Inside the station, Blair was seated behind Hamish's desk. This was one of Blair's more irritating habits. Hamish stopped in the doorway. "Sir, where have you been?" "Coffee." "There's a murder investigation." "Aye. And you're drinking coffee?" "Coffee helps me think." Blair snorted. "I've already solved most of it." Hamish looked impressed. "That was quick. Penrith had business enemies." "Who?" Blair shuffled some papers. "A developer in Inverness. A former partner in London. A local businessman. Which one killed him?" Blair gave him a sharp look. "I'm investigating that." Hamish nodded. "Aye." Blair leaned back. "We found no sign of forced entry at Bell House. Penrith's safe was open, although nothing appears to be missing. That suggests someone close to him. Could be. His housekeeper says he argued with several people." "Who?" Blair frowned. "The housekeeper." Hamish waited. Blair sighed. "Mrs. Agnes Sutherland." Hamish knew her. Everyone knew her. She had cleaned half the houses in Lochdu at one time or another and knew the contents of most cupboards better than their owners. What did they argue about? Money. Hamish's eyebrows rose. "That's unusual." "Exactly." Blair smiled as if he had made a brilliant deduction. Hamish wondered if he should tell him that everyone argued about money. He decided against it. "Anything else?" Blair shook his head. "Now, Macbeth. I want you to speak to the villagers." Hamish blinked. "Me? Yes. Why?" "Because you're good at talking to idiots." Hamish considered pointing out that Blair was included in that category. Instead, he nodded. "I'll do my best. And stay away from the Bell House." "Why?" "Because this is now a serious investigation." Hamish looked at him. "Was it not serious before?" Blair ignored him. Hamish left. His first stop was the post office. The postmistress, Mrs. Fiona McLean, was sorting letters. She looked up. "Come for gossip. Police business." "That means gossip." "Aye," she smiled. "Tea, please," she poured. "Penrith was here yesterday. What did he want?" "His mail." Anything unusual?" "He received 6 letters. From 3 solicitors, 1 bank, and 2 people whose names I didn't recognize." "Did he collect them?" "No." "Why not?" "He told me to burn them." Hamish nearly dropped his cup. "Burn them?" "Aye." "Did you?" "Of course not." "Good." Mrs. McLean lowered her voice. "He was frightened." "Of what?" "I don't know." "Did he say anything?" "He said someone had followed him from London." Hamish became still. "Did he describe them?" "No." "Man or woman?" "He said nothing." Hamish looked toward the window. "Anything else?" She hesitated. "He asked about the old church." "What about it?" He wanted to know when the bell last rang. Hamish remembered the oil on the bell. Did you tell him? No. Why? I thought he was being nosy. Hamish smiled. That was probably wise. He left the post office and walked toward the harbour. The rain had stopped. The sea was dark beneath the clouds. Angus McRae stood beside the pier repairing a net. Hamish approached. You knew Penrith? A little. Did he visit the church before today? Angus's hands stopped. Aye. When? 3 nights ago. Alone. Angus looked uncomfortable. No. Who was with him? I don't know. Hamish waited. Angus sighed. A man. Description? Tall. Hair. Dark. Clothes. Green coat. Hamish nodded. Limp. Angus stared at him. Aye. There it was again. Hamish looked out over the water. Did Penrith seem frightened? No. Angry? No. Happy? Angus gave a short laugh. He was never happy. Hamish smiled. That may have been his greatest fault. Angus returned to his net. Then he said, there was something strange. Hamish turned. What? Penrith asked me whether the bell could still be moved. Moved? Aye. Why? He said he wanted to inspect the foundation beneath it. Hamish's mind returned to the smear of oil. The bell had not simply fallen. Someone had moved it. Perhaps Penrith had discovered something beneath it. Perhaps someone else had discovered it first. Hamish thanked Angus and walked back toward the station. Halfway there, he saw a figure standing near the old cemetery wall. Celia Vane. She raised one hand. Hamish crossed the road. What are you doing here? I need to speak to you. That's convenient. Alone. Hamish glanced around. The village looked deserted. All right. Celia stepped closer. Alistair wasn't killed because of money. I suspected that. He was killed because of something he found. What? She looked frightened again. The bell. Hamish said nothing. He found something hidden beneath it. What? I don't know. You must know something. I know he was terrified. Of the man with the limp? Celia's face went white. You've seen him? No. She swallowed. Then you must leave this alone. Hamish almost laughed. That is not a very good thing to tell a policeman. You don't understand. Try me. Celia looked toward the hills. Then she whispered, the man with the limp isn't the murderer. Before Hamish could answer, she stepped backward. Who is he? Celia shook her head. Then she ran. Hamish watched her disappear. Lugs growled softly. Hamish looked toward the old church. The bell was hiding something. Penrith had known it. Celia knew it, and someone had killed to keep the secret buried. Hamish sighed. He had been hoping for an uneventful week. It appeared Lockdow had other plans. Section 4. The secret beneath the bell. Hamish returned to the police station slowly, which was how he returned to most places. There was no reason to hurry when everyone else was already rushing about making mistakes. Lugs followed him through the door, and immediately went to sleep beneath the desk. You've got the right idea, Hamish told him. The telephone rang. Hamish stared at it. It rang again. He answered, Lockdow Police. It was Blair. Macbeth, get yourself up to Bell House. Why? We've found something. What? I'll tell you when you arrive. Hamish disliked surprises. They usually involved paperwork. He put on his coat. Outside, the afternoon was beginning to clear. A thin strip of pale sunlight appeared above the mountains, illuminating the wet roofs of Lockdow. Smoke rose from chimneys and drifted toward the sea. For a moment the village looked peaceful. Hamish knew better. Bell House stood behind an iron gate at the end of a winding track. It was a large stone building with newly painted windows and expensive improvements that looked strangely out of place against the rugged landscape. Blair waited beside the entrance. You took your time. I walked. You could have driven. I like walking. Blair stared at him. There's something in the cellar. Hamish followed him inside. The house smelled of fresh paint, damp stone, and expensive furniture. The cellar was enormous. At one end stood an old wooden cabinet. Blair pointed. Penrith's housekeeper found a hidden compartment. What's inside? Nothing. Hamish looked at him. Then why am I here? Blair frowned. Because there are scratches around it. Hamish crouched beside the cabinet. The scratches were fresh. He examined the floor. Mud. 2 narrow footprints. He looked at Blair. When was this found? 20 minutes ago. Who found it? Agnes Sutherland. Where is she? Upstairs. Hamish stood. Has she been questioned? Yes. What did she say? She says she knows nothing. Hamish nodded. Then she probably knows something. Blair looked irritated. You always do that. Do what? Talk as though you're clever. I don't. Blair walked away. Hamish smiled. He examined the cabinet again. Inside the compartment was a folded piece of paper. Blair had missed it. Hamish took it out. The paper was old. On it was a rough drawing of St. Colm's Church. Beneath the bell tower, someone had written 3 words. The second stone. Hamish read them twice. What's that? Blair demanded. Nothing. Blair snatched the paper. His expression changed. What's the second stone? I don't know. You're lying. Hamish looked innocent. I rarely lie. Blair gave him a long stare. Find it. Hamish sighed. He went upstairs. Agnes Sutherland sat in the kitchen drinking tea. She was a thin woman in her 60s with iron-grey hair and a face that suggested she had been disappointed by people for most of her life. Mrs. Sutherland. Constable. Did you find the compartment? Aye. Did you know it was there? No. Hamish sat opposite her. Did Mr. Penrith ever ask you about the church? Agnes's fingers tightened around her cup. No. Did he ask about the bell? No. Did he ask about the graveyard? No. Hamish nodded. You've answered very quickly. I've nothing to hide. Most people say that when they have something to hide. Agnes glared. You're like your father. Hamish blinked. You knew my father. Everyone knew your father. What did he say about me? That you were cleverer than you looked. Hamish smiled. That's unfortunate. Agnes looked toward the window. Penrith was a bad man. Why? He bought things that weren't his to buy. What things? Land. That's legal. Not always. Hamish leaned forward. What was beneath the bell? Agnes's face went pale. You know about that? I've heard rumors. She looked at him for several seconds. Then she whispered. There are old stories. About what? Smugglers. Hamish waited. During the 18th century, ships used the coast near Loch Dhu. Some men hid contraband in the churchyard. What sort of contraband? Whiskey, tobacco, silver, treasure. People call it treasure now. And Penrith found it. I don't know. Hamish watched her. You do. Agnes looked down. He found a ledger. A ledger? Names, payments, land transfers. Old? Very old. Why would anyone kill over that? Agnes's voice dropped. Because some of the names belong to families who still live here. Hamish became thoughtful. A dead Englishman. A hidden ledger. Old family secrets. A bell that had been disturbed. And a man with a limp. It was beginning to make an unpleasant sort of sense. Where is the ledger? I don't know. Who does? Agnes looked at him. Then she said, Ask the minister. Hamish frowned. Reverend MacLeod. Aye. Why him? Because he knows what is buried beneath St. Colm's. Before Hamish could ask another question, the front door slammed. Agnes stood. Hamish moved toward the hallway. Someone had entered the house. Footsteps crossed the stone floor. Slow, uneven. A faint dragging sound followed. Hamish looked at Agnes. She whispered, He's here. The footsteps stopped outside the kitchen. Hamish reached for the door. It opened. Reverend MacLeod stood there. He was soaked from the rain. His face was pale, and he was holding a shovel. Good afternoon, he said. Hamish looked at the shovel, then at the minister, then at Agnes. Nobody spoke. Finally Hamish said, I suppose there's a perfectly innocent explanation. The minister stared at him. There is. Hamish smiled. Excellent. The minister's hand tightened around the shovel. Hamish noticed. So did Lugs, who had followed him upstairs. The dog growled. The minister stepped backward. Hamish's smile disappeared. Reverend, he said quietly, where did you get that shovel? The minister looked toward the cellar stairs. Then he whispered, I was too late. Hamish felt the first real chill of the investigation. Too late for what? The minister looked at him. To stop the second murder. A lad and a maid. Iwan Gohadan and Beesand one. And somewhere beyond the hill. Old church bell began to ring once more. Though nobody touched it. Section 5. The minister's warning. Hamish looked at Reverend MacLeod, and then at the shovel. It was an ordinary garden shovel, except that its blade was wet with fresh earth. The minister noticed Hamish staring. I found it beside the church, he said. Which church? MacLeod gave him a tired look. St. Colm's, of course. Hamish glanced at Agnes Sutherland. She had gone very still. Lugs growled again. The minister looked down at the dog. He has good instincts. He usually has better ones than me, Hamish said. Blair came down the stairs. What is going on? Hamish stepped aside. The minister has arrived. With a shovel, Blair said. Aye. Blair's face hardened. Where were you, Reverend? At the church. Why? To bury something. Blair reached for his notebook. What? MacLeod hesitated. A box. Blair looked pleased. What was in it? I don't know. You don't know? No. You carried a shovel to bury a box you haven't opened. Yes. Blair stared at him. Hamish almost felt sorry for the minister. Almost. Where is the box? Blair demanded. MacLeod looked toward the cellar. It was gone. Who took it? I don't know. Blair turned to Hamish. Macbeth. Search the church. Hamish nodded. He was relieved to have an excuse to leave the room. Outside, the evening light was fading. The rain had stopped, leaving the graveyard shining beneath a cold grey sky. Hamish walked toward the church with lugs beside him. He did not hurry. There was no point. A murderer who had killed once was unlikely to panic, because a policeman walked slowly. Inside the ruined church, the air smelled of wet stone. The bell tower stood above him. Hamish examined the ground. Several stones near the base had been disturbed. He crouched. Fresh soil. A narrow groove. Something heavy had been dragged across the ground. Lugs sniffed it. Then he moved toward the rear wall. Hamish followed. The dog stopped beside a cracked gravestone. Hamish knelt. Beneath the stone was a small piece of black wool. He recognized it immediately, the same material found in Penrith's hand. Good lad. Lugs wagged his tail. Hamish examined the wool. There was something caught inside it. A tiny brass button. He turned it over. 3 letters were engraved on the back. A.M. Hamish frowned. The minister was MacLeod. M. Agnes Sutherland had no reason to possess such a button. Penrith's initials were A.P. So who was A.M.? Hamish stood. A sound came from the graveyard. Footsteps. He moved behind the ruined wall. A man entered. Tall. Dark coat. One shoulder slightly higher than the other. The limp was unmistakable. Hamish held his breath. The stranger approached the bell. He crouched and touched the stone beneath it. Then he pulled something from his pocket. A key. Hamish watched. The man inserted the key into a small iron lock hidden beneath the bell's lower rim. A compartment opened. Hamish's eyes narrowed. So that was the secret. The man reached inside. He removed a leather-bound book. A ledger. Hamish stepped forward. The man froze. Good evening, Hamish said. The stranger turned. For a moment neither moved. Then the man ran. Hamish followed. They crossed the graveyard. The stranger moved surprisingly quickly despite his limp. Hamish slipped on the wet grass. He caught himself against a gravestone. Damn. Lugs shot past him. The dog caught the man's coat. The stranger stumbled. Hamish reached him. The 2 men crashed against the cemetery wall. The ledger fell into the mud. The stranger struck Hamish across the shoulder. Hamish grunted. He had expected better manners from someone carrying Scotland's historical secrets. The stranger pulled free and ran toward the road. Lugs barked furiously. Hamish did not chase. Instead, he picked up the ledger. The leather cover was cracked. Inside were pages of names, dates, and payments. Most entries were more than a century old, but several names had been added recently. Hamish read them carefully. One belonged to Alistair Penrith. Another belonged to Agnes Sutherland. A third stopped him. Reverend Donald MacLeod. Hamish stared at it. The minister had lied, but perhaps not about everything. He turned another page. At the bottom was a modern entry. A single name. Celia Vane. Beside it was written, P.A.'d in full. Hamish closed the book. He heard footsteps behind him. Blair appeared at the gate. Where have you been? Walking. Did you find anything? Hamish considered the ledger. Then he considered Blair. No. Blair frowned. Nothing? Just an old book. Give it to me. Hamish handed it over. Blair opened it. His expression changed. What is this? Evidence. Blair stared at the pages. For once he had nothing to say. Hamish looked toward the road. The man with the limp had vanished, but he had left something behind. A single muddy footprint. Hamish crouched beside it. The heel was marked with a small crescent-shaped cut. Hamish remembered seeing the same mark earlier, on the missing shoe beside Penrith's body. The man with the limp had been there, but he had not killed Penrith. At least Hamish was beginning to believe that. Someone else had used him. Someone else had wanted the ledger, and someone else had known exactly where to find it. Hamish looked back at the old church. The bell hung silently above him. He had the uneasy feeling that it was waiting. Blair closed the ledger. Macbeth. Aye? You're coming with me. Where? To question the minister. Hamish sighed. He would have preferred coffee, but the case had finally become interesting. That was usually when it became dangerous. And somewhere in Lockdown, a killer was beginning to realize that the supposedly lazy policeman was paying attention. Hamish pulled his coat tighter against the evening chill. Behind him, the old bell gave a final faint creak in the wind. He looked back once, then walked beside Blair toward the village, wondering which of his neighbors had the most to lose if the ledger became public before another body appeared. Section 6. The Bell Knows. Hamish had learnt long ago that ministers were easiest to question after supper. People became defensive when hungry. They became philosophical after eating. Unfortunately, Reverend MacLeod was not eating. He sat in the small interview room at the police station, with his hands folded on the table and his eyes fixed on the rain outside. Blair stood opposite him. Hamish sat in the corner. This arrangement suited Hamish perfectly. Blair asked the questions. Hamish listened. Where were you between 6 and 8 last night? At home. Anyone with you? No. Why did you take a shovel to St. Colm's? I told you. You said you were burying a box. Yes. What was in it? I don't know. Blair slapped the table. You expect me to believe that? MacLeod looked at him calmly. I expect you to believe what is true. Hamish hid a smile. Blair turned toward him. Something amusing, Macbeth? No, sir. Then stop smiling. Hamish stopped. The minister looked at him. You know what happened. Hamish shook his head. I know someone is lying. Who? I'm still deciding. Blair made an irritated noise. Hamish ignored him. He studied MacLeod. The minister was exhausted. His collar was damp. There was mud beneath his fingernails. But there was something else. A small red mark around his left wrist. Rope? No. A watch strap. Hamish remembered the minister's watch. It was missing. Reverend, he said, where is your watch? MacLeod looked down. I lost it. Where? At the church. When? Yesterday. Blair immediately leaned forward. Why didn't you mention that? I forgot. You forgot your watch? Yes. Hamish knew that was nonsense. MacLeod was not a forgetful man. He was a frightened man. Did Penrith have a watch? Hamish asked. Yes. Was it working? I don't know. Was it expensive? I don't know. Hamish looked at Blair. His watch was still on him. Blair frowned. So? So if Penrith was meeting someone secretly, he wasn't expecting robbery. Blair considered this. Unless the killer wanted us to think that. Aye. And you're suggesting? Nothing. Blair sighed. Macbeth. Sometimes I think you deliberately waste my time. Hamish smiled. That would be very unprofessional. Blair left the room. The minister waited until the door closed. Then he leaned toward Hamish. You must listen to me. I am. The ledger must disappear. Why? Because people will die. Who? MacLeod shook his head. You don't understand what is written in that book. I've read it. Then you understand. Hamish remembered the names. Penrith, Agnes, MacLeod, Celia. Who added the modern entries? MacLeod said nothing. Was it Penrith? No. Celia? No. Was it you? The minister closed his eyes. I wrote one. Hamish leaned forward. Which? My own. Why? Because I wanted the truth recorded. What truth? MacLeod looked toward the door, then whispered, Penrith had discovered that his family owned stolen land. Hamish was silent. Land around Loch Dew? Yes. Why did that matter? Because he planned to claim it. Hamish understood. Penrith had not come to Loch Dew merely to build a luxury retreat. He had come to reclaim property. Property that had belonged to his family generations earlier, and the ledger contained proof. Who would lose their homes? Several families. Did Penrith threaten them? Yes. Did someone threaten Penrith? MacLeod looked away. Yes. Who? I don't know. Hamish believed him. That was the first useful thing the minister had said. The door opened. Blair returned. We're finished. MacLeod stood. Before he left, Hamish asked one final question. Where did you get the key to the bell? The minister stopped. I didn't. Hamish frowned. Someone gave it to me. Who? MacLeod looked directly at him. Celia Vane. After the minister left, Hamish sat quietly. Blair paced across the room. So, he said, Celia is involved. Perhaps. She gave him the key. Aye. She was at the church. Aye. She knew Penrith. Aye. She lied about everything. Hamish nodded. Blair smiled. I think we've found our killer. Hamish looked at him. No. Blair's smile disappeared. Why not? Because Celia didn't kill Penrith. How do you know? Because she was afraid of the murderer. That's your evidence. No. Hamish reached into his pocket. He removed the brass button found near the church. Blair stared at it. What's that? Something from the killer's coat. Where did you find it? Near the ledger. Blair took it. AM. Hamish nodded. Who is AM? I don't know. Blair studied the button. Then his face changed. Wait. What? Angus McCrae. Hamish frowned. His middle name is Malcolm. Blair shook his head. No. Angus's full name is Angus Malcolm McCrae. Hamish stared at him. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Hamish remembered Angus standing at the harbour, his hands, his coat, his careful answers, and his knowledge of the church. Hamish stood. We should talk to Angus. They drove toward the harbour, but Angus was gone. His cottage door stood open. Inside, a kettle was boiling on the stove. A chair had been knocked over. Hamish stepped inside. On the table lay a note. Blair picked it up. It contained only 6 words. The bell knows who you are. Hamish looked toward the window. Across the harbour, the old church bell tower rose above the village. For the first time, Hamish felt genuinely uneasy. The murderer was not simply hiding. He was watching them. And whoever he was, he knew that Hamish Macbeth was getting close. Hamish put on his coat. Where are you going? Blair asked. To the bell. Why? Because if someone wants us to look there, we should find out why. Blair stared at him. That makes no sense. Hamish smiled. It does to me. He paused beneath the doorway and glanced back at the cottage. Angus had left in a hurry, but not in panic. Whoever had taken him wanted police to know. That was worrying. Hamish disliked killers who enjoyed conversation. Outside, the wind began to rise. The rain returned. And somewhere high above Lochdu, the old bell rang once. Section 7. The Fourth Keeper. Hamish reached St. Colm's just before darkness settled over the hill. The rain had returned, fine and cold, drifting sideways on the wind. Behind him, Blair climbed the slope with 2 constables, complaining about the weather, the mud, and the fact that Hamish had not waited for proper instructions. Hamish ignored him. He stood beneath the bell tower and listened. Nothing. Then lugs growled. Hamish looked toward the graveyard wall. A shadow moved. He raised a hand. Stay. Lugs stopped. Hamish walked forward alone. The shadow disappeared behind a tombstone. Hamish followed slowly. He found a coat hanging from the branches of an old hawthorn bush. It was dark green. One sleeve was torn. Hamish touched it. The cloth was damp, but not from the rain. There was blood on the cuff. Blair arrived behind him. What have you found? A coat. Blair pulled it from the branch. Could be the killer's. Could be. Blair examined the blood. We'll send it to the lab. Hamish nodded. That would take time. Meanwhile, there was something more interesting. The coat was expensive. Not Highland workwear. The buttons were silver. One was missing. Hamish looked at the brass button in Blair's hand. It did not match. Not his, Hamish said. Blair frowned. How do you know? Wrong buttons. Blair looked annoyed. You're becoming irritating. I've been told that before. They searched the graveyard. Nothing else appeared. Then lugs began barking near the bell. Hamish went over. The dog was standing beside a grave. The stone was cracked. Hamish crouched. Fresh earth showed beneath it. He touched the soil. Still warm. Someone had been digging. Get a shovel, Blair ordered. A constable hurried away. Hamish studied the grave marker. The name was Margaret McCrae, Angus's wife. She had died 12 years earlier. Hamish remembered the funeral. Angus had wept openly. The grave had always been carefully maintained. Now the soil had been disturbed. Blair stared. Why would anyone dig here? Hamish said nothing. The shovel arrived. They dug. After several minutes, the constable struck wood. A small box appeared beneath the earth. Blair ordered everyone back. Hamish watched as he opened it. Inside was a bundle of papers, an old photograph, and a silver pocket watch. Hamish recognized the watch immediately. Reverend MacLeod's. Blair swore. Why would the minister's watch be buried here? Hamish picked up the photograph. It showed 4 young men standing beside the old church. Angus McCrae, Reverend MacLeod, Alistair Penrith, and a 4th man Hamish did not recognize. On the back was written, The 4 Keepers. Hamish looked at Blair. Interesting. Blair took the photograph. Who is the 4th? I don't know. You've seen him before? No. Hamish turned the photograph over again. There was another line. Only one remains faithful. The wind moved through the graveyard. Hamish felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the weather. Blair ordered the photograph placed in an evidence bag. Then a sound came from the church. A scrape. Everyone turned. Something moved behind the bell. Blair drew his weapon. Police! Silence. Then a man's voice answered. You should have left it buried. Hamish recognized the voice. Angus. Where are you? Blair shouted. Behind you. They turned. Angus stood at the graveyard gate. His clothes were muddy. His face was bruised. He looked exhausted. Blair rushed toward him. Where have you been? Angus raised both hands. Taken. By whom? Angus looked at Hamish. Ask the man who rang the bell. Hamish frowned. What man? Angus swallowed. The fourth keeper. Blair grabbed his arm. Who is he? Angus whispered a name. Edwin Vale. Hamish felt a strange recognition. He had heard the name before. Not recently. Years ago, his father had mentioned it once. Edwin Vale had owned land near the church. He had disappeared 20 years earlier. Officially, he had left Scotland. But Hamish remembered his father's words. Some men don't leave, they simply stop being seen. Where is he? Hamish asked. Angus pointed toward the church. He's been living under your noses. Blair looked furious. Who? Angus did not answer. Instead, he looked at Hamish. He told me Penrith found the ledger. What did Penrith discover? That Vale never left. A silence fell. Hamish looked toward the ruined church. Where is he now? Angus's expression changed. Inside, Blair shouted orders. The constables spread out. Hamish moved toward the doorway. Blair caught his arm. You stay behind me. Hamish looked at him. That might be difficult. Why? Because he wants me. Blair's grip tightened. You're not going in alone. Hamish smiled faintly. I wasn't planning to. They entered together. The church was almost completely dark. Moonlight filtered through broken roof beams. Water dripped from the stones. The bell tower loomed above them. A floorboard creaked. Blair raised his weapon. Val. No answer. Hamish looked toward the altar. A lantern burned there. Beside it lay another photograph. He approached carefully. It showed the same four men, but this time, there was a fifth figure standing behind them. A woman. Celia Vane. Hamish stared. She had not been telling the whole truth. The lantern suddenly went out. Blair shouted. Someone crashed into him. Hamish heard a struggle. Then a door slammed. He ran toward the sound. A figure escaped through the rear doorway. Hamish followed into the rain. The man was limping. Hamish stopped. He could not catch him in the darkness. But he had seen his face. Edwin Vale. Older than the photograph. Older than Hamish expected. But unmistakably the same man. Val turned once before disappearing among the trees. He smiled. Then he called back through the rain. You're too late, Macbeth. Hamish stood beneath the dripping branches. For once, he did not feel lazy. He felt angry. Because Vale had not been running away. He had been leading Hamish somewhere. And Hamish suspected he already knew where. The trail led toward the old quarry, where abandoned tunnels vanished beneath the hillside. And Hamish suddenly wished he had brought his heavy rifle. Section 8. The quarry beneath the hill. Hamish had no intention of going into the old quarry that night. He had every intention of going home, making coffee, feeding lugs, and forgetting about Edwin Vale until morning. Unfortunately, murderers rarely respected sensible timetables. The quarry lay beyond the northern edge of Loch Dhu, where the road narrowed between black rocks and wind-bent trees. It had been abandoned for years. Local boys occasionally went there to frighten themselves, but adults avoided it because the tunnels were unstable and the sea had eaten into the lower passages. Hamish parked beside the gate. Lugs jumped down. You stay with me, Hamish said. The dog wagged his tail. That wasn't a request. Blair arrived moments later. You're not going in. Hamish looked at him. Then why did you follow me? To stop you doing something foolish. That may take some time. Blair frowned. A cold wind moved across the hillside. Then they heard something underground. A metallic knock. 3 times. Hamish looked at Blair. That's probably nothing. Macbeth. Why do you always say that before something terrible happens? Hamish smiled. Experience. They entered the quarry tunnel. The beam of Blair's torch moved across wet stone. Hamish used only a small pocket torch, preferring to listen. Water dripped steadily. Somewhere ahead, footsteps echoed, then stopped. Blair raised his weapon. Police, a voice answered. Turn around. Hamish recognized it. Celia Vane. She stepped from behind a stone pillar. Her face was pale. What are you doing here? Hamish asked. Looking for you. That seems unwise. You have the ledger. Yes. Then you are in danger. Blair stepped forward. You're coming with us. Celia shook her head. I can't. Why not? Because Vale knows where I live. Hamish watched her carefully. You knew him before Penrith arrived. Yes. How long? 20 years, Blair swore. Hamish ignored him. Who was the fourth keeper? Edwin Vale. We know that. Celia looked toward the tunnel. He was not the fourth. Hamish frowned. There were 4 men in the photograph. 5 people knew about the ledger. Who was the fifth? Celia looked directly at him. Me. Hamish felt a piece of the puzzle settle into place. You were working with Penrith. I was working against him. Why? Because my father was one of the families he intended to dispossess. Hamish nodded. And Vale. My father trusted him. What happened? Celia's eyes filled with tears. Vale murdered him. Blair stepped closer. Why? He wanted the land. The ledger proved the theft. My father refused to cooperate. Then why did Vale wait 20 years? He didn't. Hamish became very still. What do you mean? Vale disappeared publicly. Secretly he remained here. He changed names. He watched the families. He waited for someone to discover the ledger. Penrith. Yes. Then Penrith threatened to expose him. Celia nodded. Penrith wanted the ledger for himself. Vale killed him to protect the secret. Hamish shook his head. No. Blair looked annoyed. Why not? Because Vale could have taken the ledger and left. Celia stared at him. Hamish continued. He wanted us to find the photograph. He wanted us to know about him. Why? To frighten us. A slow clap echoed through the tunnel. Everyone turned. Edwin Vale stood at the far end. He wore a dark coat and carried a lantern. You were always clever, Hamish Macbeth. Blair raised his weapon. Drop it. Vale laughed. I have nothing. He held up both hands. Then the tunnel behind him collapsed. Stone crashed downward. Dust filled the passage. Celia screamed. Hamish grabbed her and pulled her behind a pillar. Blair shouted. When the dust cleared, Vale was gone. Hamish looked at the fallen stones. He planned that. Blair coughed. Obviously, no. Hamish pointed. A narrow opening remained beneath the collapsed section. Vale had known exactly where to stand. He wanted us separated. They moved through the opening. The tunnel opened into a chamber beneath the hill. There were old wooden shelves along the walls, boxes, barrels, rusting tools, and in the center, a table. On it lay documents. Hamish approached. The ledger's missing pages were scattered across the surface. He picked one up. The handwriting was modern. A list of names. Beside each name was an amount of money. At the bottom was a single sentence. The final payment will be made tonight. Blair read over his shoulder. Tonight? Hamish nodded. Vile isn't finished. Celia looked terrified. Who is next? Hamish studied the names. There were 4. Angus McRae, Agnes Sutherland, Reverend MacLeod, and Hamish Macbeth. He felt a chill. Blair saw the list. You're on it. Aye. Celia stepped backward. What does the amount mean? Hamish looked closer. The figures were dates, not payments. He understood. It's a schedule. For what? Deaths. Blair swore. Hamish turned toward the tunnel. The first 3 names were crossed out. His was not. He checked the time. 10 minutes past 9. Where are the others? He asked. Celia shook her head. I don't know. Hamish heard something. A bell. Far away. One deep note. Then another. The sound traveled through the stone. Hamish looked toward the ceiling. The church. Blair stared. What's happening? Hamish picked up the remaining pages. Vile isn't at the quarry. Then where? Hamish turned toward the exit. Back at St. Colm's. He started running. Blair followed. Celia came after them. Lugs barked from outside. The night had become darker, and somewhere above Lockdow, the old bell was calling the next victim toward the graveyard. Hamish reached the doorway and stopped suddenly. In the mud outside were fresh footprints, 3 sets heading downhill. One belonged to Vale, one to Celia, and the third was unmistakably smaller. Hamish crouched beside it. A child's shoe? No. A woman's narrow boot. Someone else had been waiting outside the quarry. Someone who knew exactly where they were. Hamish straightened and looked toward the village lights. We have company, he said. Blair raised his torch. Who? Hamish shook his head. That, he said, is what I intend to discover before breakfast. Section 9. The Woman in the Shadows. Hamish reached the churchyard at a run, which he considered proof that the evening had gone badly wrong. Lugs bounded ahead of him. Blair followed, swearing about the mud. Celia stayed close behind. The old bell was silent now. That worried Hamish more than the ringing. He stopped beside the gate. Listen. Everyone listened. Nothing. Then came a faint scraping sound from inside the church. Celia whispered, He's there. Hamish shook his head. No. How do you know? Because Vale wants us to think he is. Blair stared at him. You're saying the murderer isn't here? I'm saying someone wants us to enter. Hamish looked down. Fresh footprints crossed the mud. 3 sets. One belonged to Blair. One belonged to Celia. The third was smaller. The narrow boot he had noticed at the quarry. Hamish followed it toward the church wall. It stopped beneath a window. There was a smear of pale mud on the stone. Hamish touched it. Cold clay. He recognized the smell. Graveyard clay. Blair frowned. So, the quarry soil is black. Celia looked at him. The woman came from the graveyard. Hamish nodded. They entered the church. The air smelled of wet stone and candle smoke. A lantern burned near the altar. Beside it stood Agnes Sutherland. She was holding a small revolver. Blair immediately drew his own weapon. Put it down. Agnes laughed bitterly. You're late. Hamish stared. Where did you get that? From Penrith. Why? To protect myself. From whom? She looked toward Celia. Her. Celia stepped backward. That isn't true. Agnes pointed the revolver. You know it is. Hamish moved between them. Mrs. Sutherland, put the gun down. You don't understand. I rarely do at first. You found the ledger. Then you know what happened. Hamish waited. Agnes's hands trembled. Penrith wasn't the first man who came looking for that book. Who was? His father. Hamish frowned. Penrith's father. 30 years ago. She lowered the gun slightly. He came to Lockdow searching for the old records. He found them. Then he disappeared. Disappeared. Murdered. By Vale. No. Agnes looked at Celia. By her father. Celia's face went white. My father never killed anyone. He did. Hamish studied both women. The story had changed again. Why was Penrith killed? He asked. Agnes shook her head. Because he discovered the truth. What truth? The ledger was never about stolen land. Hamish waited. It was about betrayal. The church seemed colder. Agnes continued. 4 men made an agreement. They would hide the evidence and divide the profits. But one betrayed the others. Who? She looked toward the bell. Your father. Hamish felt the words strike harder than he expected. My father. Yes. Blair stared at Agnes. You're saying Hamish's father was involved? Hamish said nothing. He remembered his father's old stories, the warnings, the name Edwin Vale, the strange silences whenever St. Colm's was mentioned. For years, Hamish had thought his father simply disliked discussing the past. Now he wondered whether he had been protecting someone. Celia lowered her eyes. My father knew. About Hamish's father. Yes. And Penrith. Penrith discovered everything. Hamish looked at the bell. Then why kill him now? Agnes answered softly. Because he threatened to expose the surviving families. Which families? Mine, MacLeod's, McRae's, and Vale. He wanted all of us dead. Hamish glanced at the revolver. And you? Agnes looked exhausted. I wanted to frighten Celia. Why? Because she has the missing pages. Celia suddenly ran. Hamish caught her before she reached the doorway. She struggled. Let me go. Not until you tell me the truth. I can't. You can. She stared at him. Then she reached inside her coat and produced several folded pages. Hamish took them. The handwriting matched the ledger, but the final page contained something different. A confession. A confession, signed by Edwin Vale. Hamish read silently. Vale admitted that he had murdered Penrith, but there was a second name beneath his signature. Agnes Sutherland. Hamish looked at her. She closed her eyes. I didn't kill him. What did you do? I helped move the body. Blair stepped forward. Why? Because Vale threatened my son. Hamish's expression softened. Where is your son? Strathbane. Safe? I hope so. Hamish looked at the confession again. Something bothered him. The ink was fresh. Too fresh. He smelled the page. Candle smoke. The same smell as the church. Someone wrote this tonight. Agnes looked startled. I didn't. Celia shook her head. Neither did I. Hamish smiled faintly. Then Vale is still nearby. A noise came from the bell tower. Footsteps. Slow. Uneven. Hamish looked up. Blair raised his weapon. The footsteps stopped. Then the bell moved. Once. Twice. A shadow appeared above them. Hamish whispered. There. A figure stepped onto the wooden platform. Edwin Vale. He held a lantern in one hand and a knife in the other. You've been troublesome, he said. Hamish smiled. I've been called worse. Vale laughed. You think you've solved this? No. Hamish stepped forward. I think you've made one mistake. Vale's smile vanished. What? You told us too much. Vale looked toward the stairs. Hamish continued. You wanted us to blame Agnes. Then Celia. Then my father. Vale tightened his grip. But you forgot one thing. What? Hamish pointed at the bell. The bell doesn't lie. Vale's face changed. For the first time, Fear appeared in his eyes. Hamish knew he had guessed correctly. The bell contained something else, something Vale had never expected anyone to notice, and Hamish was suddenly certain that the final secret was not beneath the bell, it was inside it. Hamish looked up at the cracked bronze surface. A narrow seam ran around its base, almost invisible beneath years of grime. Someone had opened it recently. Vale noticed Hamish staring, and took one step backward. That was enough. Hamish smiled. "Aye," he said softly. "Now we're getting somewhere." The bell began to tremble above them, and nobody liked what came next. Section 10. The bell's last secret. Hamish had always disliked bells. They were noisy, demanding things, forever announcing weddings, funerals, and other occasions when people were expected to stand outside in bad weather. This bell, however, had become irritating. It trembled above the ruined tower. Vale watched Hamish. "You don't know what you're looking at," he said. Hamish smiled. "No. But I know what you're afraid of." Vale raised the knife. Blair shouted, "Drop it." Vale laughed. "You still think you're in charge, Inspector?" "Chief Inspector," Blair snapped. Hamish sighed. Even at moments of danger, Blair cared about his rank. The bell trembled again. A small metallic click came from inside it. Hamish looked up. There. Vale moved toward the stairs. Hamish followed. Blair caught his shoulder. "Wait. If we wait, he leaves." "There's nowhere for him to go." Mackinge pointed toward the broken roof. "There's always somewhere." Vale reached the platform. He pulled a rope. The bell swung violently. Blair ducked. Hamish did not. He had noticed something else. The rope was new. It ran through a pulley and disappeared into the bell's interior. Hamish grabbed the rope. Vale struck him. Hamish stumbled backward. Lugs charged up the stairs and seized Vale's trouser leg. Vale shouted. Blair rushed forward. The knife fell. For a moment all three men struggled on the narrow platform, then the old wood cracked. Hamish heard it. "Back!" Everyone jumped away. The platform collapsed. Vale fell through the opening. He landed heavily on the stone floor below. Blair ran down the stairs. Hamish followed more cautiously. Vale was alive. He tried to crawl toward the doorway. Lugs blocked him. "You're under arrest," Blair said. Vale laughed weakly. "For what? Murder." "Which one?" Blair hesitated. Hamish answered. "Penrith." Vale looked at him. "And who told you that?" "You did." "I never confessed." "No." Hamish crouched beside him. "But you did something better." "What?" "You tried to stop me looking inside the bell." Vale's face tightened. Hamish stood. "Open it." Blair frowned. "The bell? Aye. Why?" "Because that's where the missing evidence is." Vale shook his head. "You'll never find it." Hamish smiled. "That sounds like confirmation." They lowered the bell carefully. It took several minutes. When it finally rested on the stone floor, Hamish examined the seam. There were fresh scratches around the base. He inserted the tip of a pocket knife. The metal gave way. A hidden compartment opened. Inside was a small leather packet. Hamish removed it. The packet contained letters. Old letters. The first was signed by Hamish's father. He read it slowly. The letter revealed that the four original keepers had never been partners in crime. They had been witnesses. They had discovered that a wealthy landowner had stolen property from local families and used the church as a hiding place for forged documents. The four men had sworn to preserve the evidence until the rightful families could reclaim their land. But Vale had betrayed them. He had sold copies of the documents. Penrith's family had benefited. MacLeod's ancestors had been threatened. McCrae had hidden the ledger, and Hamish's father had protected it. Hamish lowered the letter. His father's name was cleared, at least partly. Blair read over his shoulder. "This changes everything." Hamish nodded. "It does." Agnes approached. "Is it over?" Hamish looked at Vale. "No." Vale smiled. "You still don't understand." Hamish turned. "What?" Vale looked toward Celia. "She has the last page." Celia froze. Hamish watched her carefully. Slowly, she reached inside her coat. She removed a folded sheet. "I was going to destroy it." "Why?" "Because it names my father." Hamish took the page. It contained a confession. Celia's father had not murdered Penrith's father. He had helped conceal the theft. But the final signature belonged to someone else, Edwin Vale. Hamish looked at him. "You killed Penrith because he found this." Vale said nothing. "And you killed anyone who threatened to expose you." Still nothing. "Then you used the bell to frighten the village." Vale laughed. "The bell was useful." Hamish nodded. "Aye." He looked at Blair. "Take him away." Blair handcuffed Vale. As they led him outside, Vale turned back. "You think this makes you a hero, Macbeth?" Hamish shrugged. "No. Why not?" Heroes don't get to stay in Lockdown. Blair stopped. Hamish realized he had spoken too quickly. Blair stared at him. Then he smiled. You're afraid of promotion. Terrified. Blair laughed. You're an odd man, so I've been told. Outside, dawn was beginning to lighten the hills. The rain had stopped. The sea was calm. Celia stood beside Agnes. Neither woman spoke. Hamish looked toward the church. The bell lay silent. For the first time in days, it seemed peaceful. Then Blair walked toward him. Macbeth. Hamish braced himself. You did good work. Thank you, sir. I'll put your name in the report. Hamish nearly groaned. Perhaps you could leave it out. Blair stared. You're impossible. Blair walked away. Hamish watched him go. Lugs nudged his hand. You're hungry too. The dog wagged his tail. Hamish smiled. Come on. They started down toward Lockdown. At the hotel, Mrs. Kinty had coffee waiting. She poured him a cup. Well? Hamish sat beside the stove. Messy. Did you catch the murderer? Aye. Who was it? Hamish took a sip. Someone with poor judgment. Mrs. Kinty frowned. That's not a name. It's close enough. She laughed. Outside, the village slowly woke. Fishing boats moved across the harbor. Smoke rose from chimneys. The mountains emerged from the mist. Lockdown had survived another murder. Hamish had survived another investigation. Most importantly, he had survived without being promoted. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and drank his coffee. For once, nobody needed him. Then the telephone rang. Hamish opened one eye. Mrs. Kinty looked at him. Don't answer it. Hamish smiled. I wasn't planning to. The telephone rang again. Lugs growled. Hamish sighed. Peace, he decided, was always temporary. But coffee was not. And in Lockdown, that was nearly as good. Section 11. A quiet morning in Lockdown. The telephone continued ringing. Hamish stared at it from his chair beside the stove. Mrs. Kinty stared at him. Lugs stared at both of them. Nobody moved. The telephone rang again. Perhaps it's important, Mrs. Kinty said. That's usually when it's dangerous. It might be Blair. Exactly. The bell stopped. Hamish relaxed. Then it rang again. He picked up the receiver. Lockdown Police. A woman's voice answered. Constable Macbeth? Aye. This is Detective Sergeant McRae from Strathbane. Hamish sighed. What now? There has been a development concerning Edwin Vale. Hamish looked at his coffee. Is he still in custody? Yes. Then what's the development? He's asking to speak to you. No. There was silence. You haven't heard what he wants. I know what he wants. He wants me to come somewhere. Another silence. Then the sergeant said, Actually, yes. Hamish closed his eyes. Where? The hospital. What happened? He collapsed during questioning. Hamish looked at Lugs. The dog looked away. Traitor. I'll come. Mrs. Kinty watched him put on his coat. You've only just sat down. I know. Coffee. Hamish hesitated. Take it with me. She poured it into a flask. Bring back a good story. I'll try. The hospital in Strathbane smelled of disinfectant and boiled vegetables. Hamish disliked both. Vile lay in a narrow bed with an officer outside the door. He looked smaller than he had at the church. Age had suddenly returned to his face. His eyes opened when Hamish entered. You came. I was told there was coffee. Vile smiled faintly. You haven't changed. Neither have you. I've changed considerably. Aye. Mostly in the direction of prison. Vile laughed. Then he coughed. You found the letters. Yes. You know the truth. Most of it. Vile looked toward the window. There is one thing you don't know. Hamish pulled a chair closer. Go on. The ledger wasn't the only record. What else was there? A diary. Whose? Your father's. Hamish became still. Where? Vale smiled. That is why I asked for you. Hamish disliked the sound of that. Where is it? Back in Lockdown. Where? Your father's house. Hamish stared. My father never kept a diary. He did. Why tell me now? Because I want something. Hamish nodded. Of course. You must retrieve it. Why? Because if it is found by the wrong person, everything will begin again. Hamish studied him. Everything. The land dispute. The old accusations. The families turning against one another. Hamish stood. Who else knows about it? Valet closed his eyes. Agnes. Hamish frowned. Mrs. Sutherland. Yes. And Reverend MacLeod. Yes. Angus. Valet said nothing. Hamish understood. Is Angus alive? Valet opened his eyes. Yes. Where? Safe. Hamish sat down again. Where did you hide the diary? Vale whispered. Under the floor. Hamish waited. Which floor? Your father's kitchen. Hamish almost laughed. That's convenient. Your father knew you would find it. My father died years ago. I know. Vale looked suddenly tired. Some things take years to become useful. Hamish stood. He had heard enough. As he reached the door, Vale spoke again. Macbeth. Hamish turned. You should know that Penrith wasn't the only person searching for the diary. Who else? Vale smiled. The person who killed him. Hamish froze. Penrith was killed by you. I killed him. Then what do you mean? I mean I was not the only one who wanted him dead. Hamish stared. Who? Vale closed his eyes. I never saw her face. Her? A woman. Hamish felt a familiar irritation. That's not very helpful. She wore red. Anything else? She had a silver brooch. Hamish remembered someone. Celia's coat had no brooch. Agnes wore a plain pin. But there had been another woman near Bell House. A quiet figure in a red scarf. Hamish had dismissed her as a tourist. Perhaps he had been wrong. He left the hospital. Outside, the morning sun had appeared. For once, the road back to Lockdow looked beautiful. Hamish drove slowly. His mind returned to the murder, the bell, the ledger, the hidden letters, Vale, and now the woman in red. When he reached Lockdow, he did not go directly to the police station. He went to his father's old house. The building stood empty on the edge of the village. Weathered by years of Highland rain, Hamish unlocked the door. Dust covered the furniture. Lugs sniffed the hallway. Kitchen, Hamish said. They entered. The floorboards creaked. Hamish remembered his father standing beside the stove, telling stories about fishing and storms, always avoiding the subject of St. Colm's. He knelt. One floorboard looked newer than the others. Hamish lifted it. Beneath it was a tin box. Inside lay a diary. There was also a photograph. Hamish lifted it. His stomach tightened. The photograph showed his father beside Celia's father. Between them stood a young woman. She wore a silver brooch, shaped like a thistle. On the back, someone had written 3 words. The Fifth Keeper. Hamish stared at the photograph. Then Lugs barked. Someone was outside. Hamish rose slowly. Through the window, he saw a woman standing beside the gate. Red scarf, silver brooch. She lifted one hand. Then she turned and walked away. Hamish opened the door. By the time he reached the road, she was gone. He looked at the diary, then toward the hills. The murder of Alistair Penrith had been solved, but the secrets beneath St. Colm's had not ended. Hamish opened the diary. The first page contained a single sentence. If you're reading this, Hamish, then the bell has finally rung for the Fifth Keeper. Hamish closed the book. He sighed. Lugs, he said, I think we're going to need another coffee. The dog wagged his tail. He glanced once more toward the empty road, where the woman had vanished without leaving a trace. Then he locked the door, tucked the diary beneath his coat, and headed home for now. For once, Hamish wished he hadn't been right.